Good afternoon, everyone. We are just in the process of making sure everyone is admitted, and we'll be looking to start punctually right on the top of the hour. So we'll be back with you in just a moment to kick off officially. Good afternoon and welcome to this information session related to our expression of interest process for the Pilbara Energy Transformation. My name is Tim Bray. I'm the Assistant Coordinator of Energy here at Energy Policy WA as part of the wider Department of Energy, Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety. Managed to get that mouthful out. I'm also currently the Acting Coordinator of Energy. I'm joined by Catherine Barry to my left, who is the Director of Strategic Energy Policy, and to my right, Chris McKay, who's the General Manager of the Pilbara Energy Transition process. And we also have a small army of people who are helping to make sure that everything works technically for us as we move through this process today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. We are here on Whadjuk Noongar Budja here in Perth and pay our respects to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge and pay our respects to all Aboriginal people who may be on this call here today. I'd also make a particular mention of the traditional owners across the Pilbara area who we've had the great privilege to be engaging with over the last many months as we've been working through this process. The traditional owners of the Pilbara are seminal to what we're doing and front and centre in terms of government's thinking in terms of the way in which we're looking at the clean energy transition. We have a presentation that we will work through today. It really occurs in a few parts and I'll talk to that in a moment. But what I first want to do is talk to the way in which this process works. We're an entirely online forum here today, and in a moment there'll be an event brief come up for you, which will detail some of the ways in which we work. All questions are to be posted. We're not activating microphones for this event. We have many people registered and online, and so questions can be posted throughout the event. And we'll moderate those and make sure that the panel here and the three of us are provided with those questions, and it'll be our intent to address all the questions, or certainly seek to answer as many as we can throughout this next 90 minutes. If time prevents us from doing that, we will make sure that we capture all questions, and we'll look to respond to these in writing and publish it on our website a little later. Questions requiring specific detail and that may not be readily to hand, we will deal with in the same manner in order to ensure that we respond appropriately and provide good information to all of you who may be seeking to be applicants in this process or be generally aware of this process. You should also note this event will be recorded. And our intent will be to publish it on the website not too long after we conclude. That'll allow you to read it back, listen to it back, watch it back, but also for others who may not have been able to join us here today to have access to the same information. I also want you to know that we're taking our probity process incredibly seriously, and that a representative from the West Australian Government's Department of Finance will be observing the process from a probity perspective to help keep us all well on track. The agenda that we will move through today will briefly talk to a little bit of how we got here, a little bit of what is the underlying basis of the Pilbara Energy Transition Plan. We will then move to a process whereby we discuss what we're calling priority corridors. These were announced at an event chaired by the Minister for Energy in Port Hedland last Friday, and we will talk through what they are, why they are, where they are, and the significance of them. We'll then also talk to our request for expressions of interest process, and how it works, the key elements of it, and what's driving it. We'll also talk to our process of regulatory evolution. We use the term evolution very deliberately here. Evolution is a normal part of what we do. Within any energy market, we have an existing set of rules that many of you will be familiar with. Some of you may not be so familiar with. Part of what we'll do here is point you to what they are, but also talk to you about things that we're actively considering in our normal process of regulatory evolution, noting that as we transition to a net zero ambition for the Pilbara as part of the Commonwealth's wider agenda and the state's wider agenda, some regulatory revolution is of course necessary from what has been and is a light-handed regime. We also will explore corridor rights, so corridors in the form of places where transmission can be developed and built, and some of the solutions to land tenure that we have in mind in order to help facilitate good outcomes. And this talks to a key role that the state of Western Australia is looking to play in supporting and facilitating projects move ahead, supported by private and sector investment in a way that is done right, is done in a way that meets our multiple objectives, of which we'll talk through in our session today, but also sees the state playing an active role in achieving good outcomes and supporting de-risk projects to be able to move ahead in what is, we all acknowledge, an ambitious agenda in terms of decarbonisation. There is a little bit of a delay, I'm noticing. Oh no, it's sped up now, so that's good. So just if there is a delay between what you see on screen and what you're hearing either of us talk to, just know that the slide will catch up momentarily, and hopefully that'll help fill things in. So firstly, what I want to do before handing to Chris and then Catherine is talk about the current arrangements within the Pilbara electricity system. So the Northwest Interconnected System, as it's known, you can see on the map here, it's what we would describe as a loosely interconnected system. Others would not necessarily describe it as interconnected, but it accounts for around just 20% of current electricity consumption in Pilbara. It's very different to other systems that you see in Australia. In this regard, it's being developed certainly differently to the southwest of Western Australia, which is its own separate network, and currently has 3 different owners of transmission in the Pilbara that you can see there, and with their various status in terms of third-party access. As I mentioned, just 20% of the energy consumption or electricity consumption is met by this system. The remaining 80% of the consumption, so the vast majority of it, comes from isolated or islanded facilities or isolated private networks. And so I think it's probably fair to say that when you look at this system and also recognise that just 2% of energy generated in the Pilbara at the moment comes from renewable sources, and we're looking to a net zero target, that there is significant change that is needed in terms of the way in which this work is very clear to us, and I think has become a truism in our conversations across all of the parties and actors in the Pilbara, that the current system will not in any way, shape or form be capable of delivering a net zero outcome in the Pilbara. We need to evolve it considerably, and it needs to change considerably, because clean energy transition is indeed needed. So we are not spending time on trying to justify a clean energy transition, but rather look at how we facilitate the clean energy transition. And there's a few key things that I want to highlight here, and there'll be messages that you see in our documentation, and there'll be messages that you hear from us through this process. And that is that we see our role as being one in which we provide settings through which we can create an expanded common use transmission network in the Pilbara. Common use is a key word, it's a key theme and a key requirement in terms of what we're seeking to do. And there's a few key reasons that you can see there. First is that it absolutely will accelerate decarbonisation. It is clearly in our minds and demonstrated by the work that we've done and supported by others, the most efficient path towards decarbonisation, in that it provides the greatest access to the most renewables for as many as possible. Both those who would seek to decarbonise through electrification their existing industries, but also those who are looking to create new industries fueled from clean, green energy. And that is absolutely a key focus of what we're trying to support in the Pilbara. What is also vitally important is that by doing common use, we avoid duplication. Common use is a way of ensuring that we build a solution or a networked solution that's capable of delivering the outcomes, and in doing so, minimise the impact on country, on heritage and environment by avoiding duplication. And this is going to help get us to better outcomes more quickly, and it is going to help in terms of facilitation of approvals processes that need to be administered by the state and also the Commonwealth. But very much related to that is that it is also a mechanism for us to ensure that traditional owners are very much engaged in this process. And more than being engaged in a business as usual sense, have a very clear opportunity to represent the interests of themselves and their future generations in their desire to share in the economic benefits of the clean energy transition. This is to be done with traditional owners, not to traditional owners, and that is very much the mandate that we're operating under. And so this process brings together one key element of how we're seeking to do that. By establishing this priority project regime through the identification of the priority transmission corridors that we'll talk to, through launching this expressions of interest process, which leads to a pathway of more detailed agreement making, we are on a path to being able to achieve these outcomes. And the Pilbara and this EOI process sits within what we call the wider Pilbara Energy Transition Work Plan, and we have been engaging with a Pilbara Roundtable process chaired by the Minister for Energy here in Western Australia as one of the key forums, with sub-working groups underneath that, in order to move this process forward. Before I hand to Chris to talk about the priority projects, I just want to be clear that there's been a couple of key moments that have led to this point. This is certainly a key moment in and of itself, but some time ago, in fact, back in 2022, the then Minister for Energy established the Pilbara Industry Roundtable, and through that process, over an intense but period of work, there were a number of important outcomes. Importantly, it was acknowledged by government and industry that common use transmission was the way of the future. It was the most efficient and effective means to achieve decarbonisation in line with the objectives that I talked through. It was also a place where quickly and importantly, it was acknowledged that traditional owners, Aboriginal participation was necessary for this to work, not reaction. It was recognised by all that a much more proactive approach in terms of engaging with traditional owners early was necessary to do this the right way, but also help achieve outcomes. We did acknowledge that there would need to be evolution of our regulatory system. That is a normal thing, and it's something that we'll talk to as we go through this process. But it was also acknowledged that as vast as the Pilbara is, that access to land and approvals can be a challenge. There are multiple forms of tenure that exist across multiple acts, and navigating that can be a real challenging thing. And so we recognised early on in the process that that was a key role that government needed to step in and support, and in doing so help de-risk projects and therefore facilitate investment to move forward. Off the back of these really important outcomes, the Australian government quickly agreed to allocate up to $3 billion of concessional finance for Western Australia through its Rewiring the Nation program. This is led by its Department of Clean Energy, Environment and Water. I might have missed one or two things, but DQ as it's colloquially known, but particularly administered through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Importantly, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, off the back of this agreement, have been very quick to say that their consideration of projects in Western Australia will be very much driven by the state priorities, hence the importance of this process, and in fact stapled to the state priorities. So the pathway to accessing this concessional finance, which is meaningful in terms of the way in which it shifts the dial on the doability and commerciality of transmission projects, particularly in the Pilbara, but generally is through this process. And it's the key reason why those seeking to access concessional finance in Western Australia and in this moment in the Pilbara need to move through this process. The state has also further upped its game, and the state in particular has agreed and funded what it's calling the Pilbara Energy Transition Plan, of course, which this is part, and allocated funds across government in the form of people, but also resources to make sure that we do this and do this well and do this quickly and effectively so that we give the best chance possible for good investments to occur quickly in order for goals that have been set in industry and more broadly by 2030 and beyond to be near and real in terms of our decarbonisation goal. And off the back of that, the state government also committed to a new roundtable. This time it was launched bringing together government, traditional owners from across the Pilbara and of course industry as equals at the table to understand, steer and govern this process. And that has met a number of times this year and is supported by working groups underneath it for traditional owners, but also industry and some technical fora in order to do the work that allows us to drive forward and most recently see us announce this priority project list and also the expression of interest process that we're talking to today. So with that introduction, I will now hand to Chris McKay, who will be talking through the priority projects.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Firstly, I'd just like to outline in 2023, state government outlined its vision for a common use network in the Pilbara. This would achieve three objectives. Firstly, it would allow for the decarbonisation of existing industry all throughout the Pilbara over the coming decades. Secondly, it will facilitate the development of potentially new industries, particularly in the strategic industrial areas. And thirdly, as Tim pointed out, we're looking to have an efficient and common use transmission network in the Pilbara that minimises impact on country. In 2024, the government outlined four key priority areas, corridors, which would make the first phase of a common use transmission network in the Pilbara. The idea behind this is to link as many of the high electricity demand areas throughout the Pilbara with as many and diverse range of high quality wind generation areas in the Pilbara. The reason why we mention wind is because solar is universally excellent across the Pilbara, whereas wind is quite variable. And so that'll play an outsized role in the location of renewable generation. So we had two projects, two priority corridors in the West Pilbara and two in the East Pilbara there. So just moving along to these projects individually. Firstly, we've got the Burrup corridor, which will link the Maitland industrial area to the Burrup strategic industrial area on the Murujuga Peninsula and go via Karratha. This will be looking to achieve three things. One, it will allow greater decarbonisation and accelerated decarbonisation for the existing industries on the Burrup Peninsula, which include liquefied natural gas producers and fertiliser producers. Secondly, it will allow for a connection into the broader Northwest Interconnected System through the coastal network there at Karratha. And thirdly, it will facilitate the activation of the Maitland Strategic Industrial Area, home to where the state hopes to have future industrial development in the region. This project was initially conceived as a 132 kV solution to deliver 50 megawatt solar farm electricity to the Burrup Peninsula. However, The state government responded to traditional owner concerns that this might, being a small solution, lead to duplication across the peninsula there. So the state's now working in partnership with traditional owners, industry and Horizon Power on looking for a larger capacity solution, and we'll be looking for investors to take this to the next stage. Second priority corridor on the west of the Pilbara there is the Chichester Range corridor. This corridor here looks to connect the Maitland Strategic Industrial Area down to the high quality wind areas further south towards the Chichester Range. So the Chichester Range is a hilly escarpment that rises above the coastal plain just south of Karratha there and goes all the way across towards Headland. The reason why this area has been highlighted is because there's high quality wind there and it's located just out of the wind category D zone, which may make it a little more favourable for development. This area will be important to service the loads and expected loads there on the Burrup Peninsula and at the Maitland Industrial Estate. And also over time, with a more interconnected network, may provide a valuable source of diversity where many of the high quality wind regions are on the east and south of the central Pilbara. Moving over to the east is the Hamersley Range corridor. This will be a particularly important part of the overall interconnected Pilbara network. It's looking to commence a connection there at Port Hedland and the Bidari Strategic Industrial Area and head all the way south down to the eastern edges of the Hamersley Range there. So the Hamersley Range is has some of the highest altitude parts of the state, a fairly flat state being Western Australia. It's also home to the iron ore industry there, with significant volumes of iron ore being mined there. This makes an obvious selection for a common use transmission line. There's a great diversity of potential customers for electricity from the Bidari Strategic Industrial Area, Port Hedland, the largest bulk export port in the world. We've got lithium miners, iron ore miners, and so there's a great diversity of different potential customers. It also has a great diversity of different wind resources with significant high quality resources just to the east and just to the south of this line. And lastly, on the east here, we have the Great Sandy Desert Corridor. This is a corridor that will commence at Port Hedland and Bidari and looking to extend east into the western edge of the Great Sandy Desert, an area that's quite remote and known for some fairly distinctive sand dunes that progress along there. This is looking to link vast quantities of potential renewable resources that proponents are looking to develop out in this area with the major load centres up there on the coast, and combined with the Hamersley Range corridor will provide a diverse range of renewable resources which can ensure a competitive supply of green electricity to the eastern Pilbara. That I might pass over to Catherine.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to take you through our expression of interest process. Slide's a little bit behind, but I'll just get started. It'll catch up in a second. As Tim mentioned, the request for expressions of interest was launched by the Minister for Energy at the Pilbara Roundtable meeting in Port Hedland on the 13th of September. The package itself includes 3 documents: an application form, a process deed poll, and the application guidelines, which provide the majority of the detail for proponents applying. The purpose of the expression of interest process is to identify project proponents who will be awarded priority project status, and ultimately that means those proponents will be on the pathway to negotiating agreements with the state, namely corridor tenure agreements and corridor development agreements. We'll discuss those in more detail later, and also receiving a WA government recommendation to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Australian Government for the project to be considered further rewiring the nation concessional finance that Tim mentioned earlier. There are 3 eligibility criteria in the process, 3 simple criteria. The first being that the project seeks to provide transmission infrastructure to service the priority corridors that Chris has already mentioned. There is evidence from a suitably authorised person within your organisation that the project is supported and that you have signed, executed and submitted the process deed. Then we move into assessment of applications. The applications must address all the criteria that's outlined in section 5.2 of the application guidelines. There's no formal weighting of the criteria. We'll assess applications in their totality. We recognise that projects will be at different stages of development, so the amount of detail and supporting information to be provided should be relative to the stage of your project, the size, etc. We have included for each of the criterion examples of documentary evidence to support meeting the criteria. These are examples only. You provide documentation that's required to support and what best fits with your stage of project development. I just bring to your attention that in the application guidelines, we've outlined that additional information can be made available on request. The first being the electricity sector modelling we undertook in 2023 as part of the initial Pilbara Industry Roundtable series, and also some additional information on the Burrup knowledge of the project. And lastly, on this slide, this is also highlighted in the guidelines that submission should be based on there being no express or implied commitment from the state or rewiring the nation that projects will be funded. The criteria. So there are five key assessment criteria that reflects the state's objectives under the Pilbara Energy Transition Plan. There's a slide for each one of these criteria, so I'll progress through those one by one. These are the five criteria here. Supports Pilbara decarbonisation, positive outcomes for traditional owners of the community, provides common use infrastructure, and if the project is viable in time. So criteria one. What we've included on each of these slides is the assessment criteria for each criterion mentioned in the application guidelines. The first criterion is about ensuring the transition project is appropriately sized and supports accelerated decarbonisation through efficient linking of renewable generation to demand centres. So it's about future-proofing, making sure that we have sufficient capacity as we expand the Pilbara into the future. Some of the documentary evidence we are looking for under this criteria include items such as a network map, foundation user demand and design to meet that demand, as well as the proposed actual design that will provide additional capacity above foundation demand. Criterion 2, relating to delivering positive outcomes for traditional owners. Under this criterion, we need the project proponents to demonstrate or commit to demonstrate best practice engagement with traditional owners, traditional owner groups, and mechanisms to share project benefits with these groups. Some of the evidence that could be submitted in support of this criterion include an Aboriginal engagement plan, commitment to involve traditional owners and their communities across the life of the project, and identification of proposed benefit sharing mechanisms. Criterion 3, similar to criterion 2, we're looking for the project proponent to demonstrate or commit to demonstrate best practice engagement and consideration of benefits with impacted communities. Examples of evidence will include community engagement plans and community impact mitigation plans. Criterion 4, around providing common use infrastructure. Tim's already referenced the importance of common use infrastructure and the fact that it was a key agreed outcome from the Pilbara Industry Roundtable series, which concluded in 2023. So a key component of this criterion is a commitment from a project proponent to be a covered network under the Pilbara Networks Access Code to provide third-party access. One of the points to note in relation to this criterion relates to vertical integration, which is referenced in criteria J. What we are looking for in this criterion, we've outlined requirements in our documentary evidence box of what the information that we're seeking, where a proponent proposes to be vertically integrated. In this context, we're looking for what protections a proponent would wish to have in place if it was not awarded priority project status and instead its related business had to seek access to a transmission network operated by another vertically integrated business. This criterion also seeks information on revenue and tariff models and the commitment to the corridor code model, which is outlined in Appendix 8.2 of the guidelines, and we'll talk in further detail about a little bit later. And our last criterion is around project viability and timeliness, which is simply to ensure that the proponent has the capacity to progress and deliver the project in a timely fashion. So we're looking for items such as project plans, financial capability statements, technical capability statements. These, as I mentioned, these are all detailed in the application guidelines in boxes per criterion. It provides you a rather detailed list of what we're looking for to satisfy these criteria. Moving on now to the selection process. As I mentioned, applications will initially be assessed against the eligibility criteria, and then eligible applications will be assessed in terms of how well they meet the assessment criteria, if applicable, how they compare to other applications, and any other relevant information that is included in your application. The applications will be assessed by a panel of senior public servants who will have access to external subject matter experts. The panel will then provide recommendations to the WA government as to which projects should be awarded priority project status. The last slide here in this section is taken from the expression of interest document, shows a flowchart of the process that we're progressing through. As you can see, we're currently at the second step with the Q&A session today, with applications due to close around 4 weeks from now on the 25th of October. So that is the process, the expression of interest process. So now I'm going to move on to some additional information that we've included in the appendices of the application guidelines, starting with regulatory evolution. So the current Pilbara electricity regulatory regime commenced in July 2021 and includes two key instruments. Firstly, the Pilbara Networks Rules, which establish the rules for the operation, management, security and reliability of Pilbara networks, and the functions of the Pilbara Independent System Operator, which is known as the Pilbara ISOCO. The second instrument is the Pilbara Networks Access Code, which governs access to regulated networks in the Pilbara, and currently only the Horizon Power Coastal Network and APA's networks are covered under the PNAC. Tim referred previously to the evolution of the regulatory regime. It's a normal process, can happen at any time. There are processes outlined in both the rules and the Pilbara Networks Access Code as to how changes are to be progressed. And in both cases, this involves a transparent and consultative approach. On to the next slide. So we have two processes running. Firstly, there's an evolution of the Pilbara Networks rules and also an evolution of the Pilbara Networks Access Code. So the Pilbara Networks rules evolution is reviewing the Pilbara regime's governance arrangements to ensure they remain fit for purpose. This will likely lead to changes to the rules and to the Pilbara ISOCO's internal arrangements. The rules and the Pilbara harmonised technical rules are also being reviewed more generally to ensure they enable and support a substantially expanded Pilbara grid with a high penetration of renewables. Information on these reforms is available on our website, but at a high level, modelling completed in July this year identified that there are potential efficiencies of 20 to 30% in generation capex savings to be gained from increased integration and sharing of resources. A number of design initiatives relating to the network rules and the harmonised technical rules have been identified to facilitate renewables entering the system and encourage that increased sharing of resources. A working group is currently developing options, and a consultation paper will be released in December for a 2-month period. Appendix A.1.5 provides a summary of the way in which the Pilbara Networks Access Code is intended to evolve in each of the areas listed on this slide. Some of the key points to note in relation to that evolution include we intend that all transmission lines that form part of the core interconnected network will be covered. It's a key criterion, so that's obvious. We do not intend to change the current arrangements that provide for access contracts to be negotiated between network service providers and access users. And where, as most people would know, where people can't reach agreement, arbitration is available. So while we don't intend to change these arrangements, we may introduce faster and more effective accountability measures to supplement arbitration. We do not intend to change arrangements that allow a service provider to design its tariff and revenue methodology under the PNAC. The network service provider will be free to negotiate bespoke tariff arrangements with access seekers, and these will be unregulated, other than making sure they are not underwritten by cross subsidies from other users. We may extend the current mechanism that allows a network service provider to seek pre-approval from the Economic Regulation Authority of its capital expenditure to other matters such as the rate of return and the depreciation schedule. The last slide in this section just simply shows where we're at in terms of consultation on the PNAC evolution. We're currently engaging through the Industry Liaison Committee, which sits under the Pilbara Roundtable, as mentioned by Tim earlier, and through one-on-one targeted stakeholder meetings, which we will continue to do. We're looking to finalise what we believe needs to change in the PNAC by the end of the year, and a formal consultation process as required by the Electricity Industry Act will be progressed during 2025. The last section of our expression of interest document in Appendix 8.2 relates to corridor rights and land tenure. So, no surprise, infrastructure corridors in the Pilbara are strategically important to the state. We're intending that tenure or rights for transmission corridors will be secured and held by a state entity, currently known as Corridor Co. The reason for this is we want to ensure that objectives regarding traditional owner participation are met, that proponents deliver on commitments made in their responses to the expression of interest in respect of state objectives, and where possible, allow the state to retain the ability to host non-conflicting activities within a priority corridor. So in addition to securing and holding land tenure rights, Corridor Co will be expected to enter into corridor development agreements and corridor tenure agreements, which will grant proponents adequate rights to enable them to develop, then build, own and operate their transmission assets. We'll talk a little bit about this on the next slide. If appropriate, to undertake early development work for priority projects and to deliver or collaborate with proponents to deliver best practice engagement with traditional owners and other land interest holders. There's quite a lot of detail on this slide, but in summary, the principal instrument for each transmission project by which adequate rights for transmission infrastructure in a relevant corridor will be granted will be a corridor tenure agreement on the right, but in the development phase of the project and as a precursor to the corridor tenure agreement, it is proposed that the state, through Corridor Co, will enter into a corridor development agreement with the successful owner. The terms of the corridor development agreement and the corridor tenure agreement are to be negotiated, but we've listed in the appendices 2.5 and 2.6 the key matters that are expected to be covered by both agreements. Won't go through that in detail, but wanted to bring that to your attention that information is included in the appendices. A key point to note also on this slide in the orange box is that existing projects that already have secured some form of tenure rights will be expected to transfer those to Corridor Code through the Corridor Development Agreement and or ultimately the tenure agreement. Finally, the last slide in this section, we recognise that tenure across the Pilbara is complicated and different tenure solutions may be required in different locations. It may prove necessary for a project to commence development under one form of tenure and then transition ultimately to a more enduring form. As Tim referenced early in the presentation, government approved a funding package for the Pilbara Energy Transition Plan, which included funding a team that has been established within the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, specifically relating to tenure in the Pilbara. EPWA, or Energy Policy WA, has been working very closely with DPLH on tenure options, and all options are being explored, and tenure pathways will ultimately be negotiated with successful proponents. And that takes us through to the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Chris and Catherine. Excellent work in running through that. There's a lot to get through there, but I think the team have done a great job in giving you a tour of all the key parts and diving into a little bit of detail that is referenced within the EOI guideline document itself in order to support you. Given that they've both done a fair bit of talking, I'll move into the Q&A session now. And we have one here regarding the CEFC. So Tim asks, how well does the CEFC understand this EOI process? Have they endorsed the EOI process? How will an EOI endorsement influence a CEFC decision to provide concessional finance, I'm guessing, to a project? Look, the answer to that is that we've been very closely connected with the CEFC throughout this process. We've had regular engagement with them as we've developed along the way, including the development of our approach to priority projects and our approach to an EOI, which can support a reference to them. It's important to say that the CEFC, of course, is independent of the West Australian government and make decisions under their own mandate. And in this particular instance, under the Rewiring the Nation mandate that they've been provided. But it's clear that the CEFC, I used the language before, looking to the state priorities and the outcome of this EOI process in terms of where they focus their efforts around consideration of providing concessional finance. So this EOI process is designed to do exactly that, and the CEFC understand that very well, and will pick up off this process to do their piece in a very focused way. We now have also a question. David asks, is the design criteria such as transmission line being undertaken as part of the roundtable process? David, I think I understand your question. The key thing here to note is that the roundtable process has been the place through which we bring everything back. It's the process which is supported by a working group of traditional owners, but also an industry liaison committee that we have been working closely with in terms of this overall approach. Importantly, in terms of transmission line design, we haven't done that. What we have done is set out in the EOI document the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve and the way in which we'll assess proponents' applications against that outcome. So we're not looking to design specifically the transmission lines. Rather, we are looking to support and provide guidance to would-be applicants and proponents to develop their design in such a way that they can meet the needs. We have a further question following on from the CEFC. I understand the $3 billion is shared between NWIS, i.e. the Northwest Interconnected System, and the Southwest Interconnected System. Is there an estimate for the Northwest allocation? So you are correct. The allocation from the Commonwealth Government is a West Australian allocation, so it can apply within the Southwest. The state has, in its conversations with the federal government and also the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, has indicated where its priorities lie and where we think best use of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation concessional finance is. That doesn't exclude the potential within the Greater Swiss, but the focus is through this process presently, and therefore the Pilbara. There is no formal split. There is no formal ratio or allocation between the Northwest and the Swiss, but this process is where the state is currently focusing its efforts and near-term opportunities for funding under Rewiring the Nation. Just looking to see if there's any other questions. I think we might have another one coming through in just a second. While we get that up. Okay, we have a question here. Are proponents required to submit an end-to-end solution, or investors encouraged to submit independent EOIs? So I think I understand this question. So recognising that this is an expression of interest process, and what the document does is outline that successful outcome in the expression of interest process provides a pathway not only to the CEFC in terms of a potential financing agreement, but also a pathway with the state in terms of working through corridor development agreement, not ultimately a corridor tenure agreement. And so we recognise that at this stage, not all projects will be at a level that is near to or approximating a final investment decision, and that there will be further development that will be required post EOI. What we're seeking is the proponents or applicants to lay out what those next steps look like, how they're going about it, in order to provide clear milestones that demonstrate satisfaction of criteria 5, which relates to timeliness and readiness, in order to give the state confidence that if that particular applicant is successful in this process for one or a number of the priority projects Chris spoke to, that we can be confident that it will move ahead, and it will move ahead on a good timeline. Proponents or developers are, I guess, in looking at these priority projects, we recognise that as time moves on, more information will come to light in terms of the evolution of the Pilbara, and we recognise that other priorities may well come into frame, and so we remain open to submission from industry, submission from developers that would see new priorities brought to us and justified in the context of the guidelines that we've illustrated, and that we will actively look at that as we move along. Okay, we have another question here. If a proponent is put forward to the CEFC following the EOI but subsequently fails or withdraws, is there a reserve proponent that the state would fall back on? What the EOI guidelines do is outline that if a proponent is not able to move forward, or as you've suggested here in this question, withdraws, that the state will then look to provide that priority status to another party. This process, in potentially attracting multiple applicants, I wouldn't necessarily categorise them as reserve as such, but we'll have the opportunity to develop a list of proponents who may well still be keen to pick up the opportunity should someone fall out. We would absolutely look to that established list in order to seek a development again on a timely basis. One of the key interests that the state has here is to be able to see something move forward, but move forward in the right way. So hopefully, CME, that has answered your question. Can you please provide more clarity on the expectations of the tariff and revenue model submission? Catherine, I'd like to hand to you on that one.
Yeah, so thanks, Tim. So look, it'll need to be consistent with the current PNAC requirements, subject to any of the comments we put in the appendices around where we are evolving. And it should show that the transmission project in each corridor that the bid for can stand alone.
Thanks, Catherine. Sally has a question. Do you have a view on how much utility scale wind and solar will be required and is planned in the Pilbara, and then exactly how much new transmission capacity will be needed and where? Chris is our man to answer this one.
Yeah, sure, thanks for the question. So we looked at a range of different scenarios that involve decarbonisation of what's there, and also focusing heavily on the electrification of mine haulage. We've also looked at scenarios that involve the creation of new industries at strategic industrial areas where you see significant demand for electricity towards the coast. So we've tested that common use vision, I guess, with a couple of different scenarios. And we end up with a fairly similar sorts of requirements in terms of the overall architecture. Obviously, the scale and the timing of projects will change depending on your demand assumptions. So what we've proposed here in terms of our priority corridors, I think, meet what we can reasonably expect to have as demand in the near to medium term, and also allow the possibility for scale and also competition to allow for a diverse range of different renewable resources to reach demand and customers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Should also mention, I think Catherine made mention of there is some additional information that's available to proponents. So if you email us at the email address provided within the guideline document, we'll be able to share with you information that talks directly to this question. So I encourage you to do that. Part of our commitment is that we are undertaking ongoing whole of system modelling. That was a key part of what helped provide the basis for Chris's answer just now, and the document that we can share with you should you seek it. And we are in the process of doing that again. This is something that we've committed to do for the out years, recognising that decarbonisation and plans can be dynamic. We want to maintain a really clear view on what it is that's happening and where changes occur, so that we can stay focused there. Okay.
There's a couple of admin questions.
Yeah, go for it.
So one of them was who was the best contact person. We've provided the PET Secretariat email address, which is included in the EOI document, which is pet.secretariat@demos.wa.gov.au. Another question we've had is, will there be further competitive processes following the EOI? So while we're focused on the 4 priority corridors that Chris talked to today, it's not the end of the energy transition in the Pilbara. And we actually signalled in the document that there could be further processes either relating to these priority corridors if required, but also future priority corridors. One of the work streams of the Pilbara Energy Transition Plan is ongoing annual electricity sector modelling, which is informing our view of the Pilbara going forward. And we have that work is progressing under the roundtable, specifically through the Industry Liaison Committee and a technical working group process.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, I did notice a couple of hands pop up. We're not able to enable the ability to ask questions verbally. We need you to go into the Q&A function and post your questions there. That's simply because of the very large number of people that we have on this call. It's the only way to facilitate it. Apologies for any inconvenience that causes, but we will get to your question if you can post it in there. Okay. Can you please clarify whether the proponent is required to take electricity generation risk in order to meet off-takers' requirements? If so, where is the generation expected to come from? Catherine?
We have outlined this in the expression of interest that we expect proponents to take on the risk of additional capacity, and we expect proponents to build their own book of network demand comprising of a mix of generation and load. This process will likely continue during the negotiation stage following the EOI process. As I mentioned, we expect proponents to take on the demand risk and to demonstrate in their revenue and tariff model how they propose to manage risk. There is some text under the criterion 4, I believe, on providing commons use infrastructure, which talks to the type of information we're looking at to demonstrate how that risk will be managed.
Thank you, Catherine. We have a question on the model. Is EPWA expecting the actual model file is submitted or just the relevant outputs? Is there going to be any more information or assumptions provided to the EOI? Chris?
So we've got an information pack on that. We won't be able to provide the actual model itself, just simply because that will reveal all the information on individual proponents, and we would need to get everyone's consent to do that. So if you have any specific additional queries, you can send those to PET Secretariat, and we will consider those. They're noting that whatever we hand out there, we will publish on our website so that it's available for all.
Thanks, Chris. We have a question here. Does the Priority Projects Department have an Aboriginal Liaison Officer or Department for Small to Medium Aboriginal owned control businesses to engage with regarding any queries that may be culturally sensitive? So we do have our Aboriginal participation team as part of this EPWA-led team. If you want to submit through the email that was provided before, we're very happy to connect you in with the key people that can support you in this regard. So happy to support that. Is the EPWA modelling report information just a summary report, or is there more detail that can be provided? Chris?
Yep. So that was, I think, the one that I just did.
I think we probably covered that.
Yep.
Yep. So I think we probably covered that one. Okay. I've noticed that only wind and solar are the primary project discussions. Would geothermal power form part of this strategy?
So wind and solar is just simply the output of the modelling assumptions that we have. We use the CSIRO GenCost database as our primary source for costs for power generation, and ultimately the outputs from the model are the least cost solution based on those inputs and the various weather data that we include there as well. I would note that generation costs are dynamic over time, and we will consistently review this. And just because one technology is looking like it's the most economic in 1 year doesn't mean it necessarily will the next year when more information comes to light. So we'll continue to review and look at all options.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've got a couple more questions just coming through. So give us a moment and we'll pick those up for you. How secure is the Rewiring the Nation funding that has been allocated to WA? Context is that asking because a recent story in the Australian noted that the federal opposition has flagged cancelling Rewiring the Nation fund. So it would be good to get a view on whether that funding is able to be transmitted to WA ahead of the federal election. Thank you for your question. So look, the reality is that the project exists and has a clear terms of reference and a clear mandate for the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. We are actively moving on a time frame that sees us moving ahead with this expression of interest now. You can see that applications are due with us by the 25th of October. That allows us to do our work promptly in order to provide recommendations to government here and therefore a recommendation to the CEFC so that we can be moving ahead quickly. We've always wanted to do that, not because of election cycles, because it's the right thing to do in order to meet decarbonisation goals. We can't speak for what future governments would do. What we can do is deal with the here and now in terms of what the commitments are, in terms of the policy settings and the funding that exists. And we are actively looking to make best use of those in the nearest timeframe possible. We have a question, Catherine, around opt-in in PNAC.
Yeah, so the EOI does require that projects will opt in to be regulated under the PNAC, under the light regulation model, and ask for questions around the timing of complying. Our intention is that you will be complying with that requirement early in the stage of the process. However, we can look to address that timing through the negotiation process following the EOI.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, we have a further question. What is your current view on ancillary support services to enable high penetration of renewables, e.g. firming, system strength, inertia, etc.? Do you require the proponent to include these components in the submission? Catherine.
So we intend that this will be managed by the independent system operator under the Pilbara Networks rules. But happy to hear comments through submissions that we receive.
Thank you. Can you say when EOIs will be finalised following 25 October by the end of 2024? Question mark. Look, we're moving with strong intent. We're looking to be able to move forward on a timeline that is as quick as it can be in order to provide certainty to the industry and certainty to developers. And as I said before, in answer to another question, in order to be able to provide those references to the CEFC so that its work can get underway in earnest, and the other pieces of work with government. I can't give you a strict timeline on that piece, but only to communicate is our clear intent to move ahead on a very timely, in a very timely manner, I should say. Is there any weighting in the EOI process to prioritise the use of WA-owned and operated construction companies in the execution of this phase of projects? Catherine.
It's a good question. And we are working with the Department of Finance in relation to the criteria. As mentioned, there's no formal weighting on the criteria, and the applications will be assessed in their totality. But yet, can I say we're working with the Department of Finance around probing issues, and obviously there's inclusion of local content is an issue for the state government. This is not a unusual procurement process. We're facilitating agreements through to a recommendation through the WA government and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation.
Thank you. Okay, we'll just give a moment for any further questions to come through. Encourage you to submit all your questions. We're happy to make full use of the time that we've got available in order to explore any and all matters that you may have. So don't feel like any question can't be asked, and absolutely can. We're keen to support this process to the greatest extent possible.
But also, I guess, if questions come through after, we're happy to provide responses written, but they will be published and made available to everybody. So a little bit of gap there.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, it's a good point. We have a facility on our website where questions can be posted, and I guess to make sure that we are in fact running a fair and equitable process, we'll make sure that we share those answers, just like we're sharing with all of you here today, as we move on and through this process.
And we had a question on confirming applications of EOIs to the PET email address, and yes, that is correct.
Okay, give it another few moments to see if anything else comes in. Okay, well, what I would like to do at this, oh, hang on, we've just got another one. Are meetings available to be arranged with priority projects personnel through contacting the PET Secretariat address? When do you expect the additional modelling data to be made available? In terms of meetings, we're reluctant to meet with individual parties. There may be circumstances where it's appropriate. We'll take probity advice in and around doing that to make sure that there is no perception of any single party being provided with information that isn't otherwise provided to others. But encourage you to submit your request, and we will deal with it in a straightforward manner. In terms of that additional modelling data, that's available now. You just need to submit a request, and it can be made available to you with some provisions around confidentiality and not on sharing. Will wind and solar proponents take part in this EOI or just transmission providers? It's a good question. We're fundamentally focused on transmission here. So this is about the transmission that will connect renewable energy, wind, solar, and potentially geothermal, as was raised in another question, or other forms of renewables, should they become scalable and economic. Part of what you heard Catherine talk to was this concept of vertical integration. What we understand is that there are business models that are emerging where investors in transmission may also have interests in generation, and that may be a business model that they're looking to utilise. And so we could see that the answer to that question could be might be only transmission providers, it might be those who do both. But as Catherine very clearly set out, and as the document sets out, where vertical integration is contemplated, there are some particular things that we'll be looking for to ensure that market power isn't inappropriately exercised and counterintuitive in terms of the broader outcomes that we're looking for. We have a question here from Nara Corporate Services. Can you recommend any external entities that can provide additional support with applications? So for traditional owner and Aboriginal corporations, we do in fact have what's called the Traditional Owner Participation Scheme. And so contact us through that address that we've provided, that email address, and we'll be able to link you in to that, where we are able to provide some direct support, but also some potential recommendations in terms of parties who may be able to provide the sort of support you're looking for. So I encourage you to please submit through that. What type of expertise do you think the assessors will refer to and or need? Can you give an indication of the type of experts that will be available to the assessors? The assessment panel will be an assessment panel of very senior government people across key government posts. They will be advised by not only Energy Policy WA and other parts of government, but we also have a bid advisory team that's made up of commercial advisors and legal advisors and probity advisors. You can see that there will be specialist advice that will come to the table that will support us in that regard, noting that other elements that are relevant to the criteria, particularly in around traditional owners and the like, there are very capable resources within government that will provide advice to the assessment panel in and around those elements that aren't otherwise covered by our commercial, legal and other advisors. Will the department play a connecting role between proponent and TO groups for the EOI process? So what we're not doing is encouraging proponents to rush to the doors of traditional owners through this process. that could create a situation of overwhelm. We know that traditional owner groups in the Pilbara already have quite a lot to deal with in terms of their normal operating business. It's why the EOI itself is very much focused on commitments in terms of the way in which the applicant will look to bring best practice engagement and look to models of benefit sharing that are progressive and likely to be attractive to traditional owner groups. Through the corridor co-functions, the state will actively very much provide a role in facilitating agreement making with traditional owners, and that is something that we'll be doing very, very deliberately. Question here, how does the Pilbara Energy Transition Plan integrate with the Horizon Power Green Link project? Firstly, point of clarification, it's not Horizon Power's Pilbara Green Link project. It's actually being developed by a consortia known as the Australian Renewable Energy Hub. They are the ones who are behind that. I think that's public knowledge. And so Horizon Power and the work done by the Australian Renewable Energy Hub is something that the state has been monitoring. You can see that we are very eager in order to connect large-scale renewable and to see it integrated into the system. We also understand that there are projects, this being one of them, that have been under development for some period of time, and we've been looking to understand that development in order to integrate with our process as best as possible. Probably what I do need to say, and what I want to be very clear on though, is that as this process is just beginning, the state has not formed a view on who yet will be successful through this process, and any development that's underway at the moment should not be interpreted in any manner, way, shape or form as being an indication of the state's preference for one provider over another, and that includes anything that Horizon Power may currently be involved in. Are there any indications or commitments for offtake? There are, I guess, across the projects that we've indicated as priority. One of the reasons that we've indicated them as priority is because that we see that there is real and emerging demand. These aren't, if you like, speculative in the sense of having no interest in offtake, whether it be or for that matter, the ability to connect new green generation to it. We do have, through the Burrup process that we've been active in already, and that there's been some public announcements on made a few weeks ago, some information that can be shared on a confidential basis. Catherine referred to that earlier. Encourage you to contact us if you're interested in that particular project and some of the information that we can share there. What are we, what is expected of the commercial model for delivery? Might refer that one to Chris.
So the what we're expecting for the commercial model is ultimately for proponents to develop these projects within the PNAC parameters as outlined in the guidelines. Essentially, ultimately, as Catherine outlined, we have a light touch regulatory regime which allows for arbitration, but without the upfront, heavy regulation in terms of the pricing there. So is there anything you wanted to elaborate on that, Catherine?
I think we have included some information in relation to the documentary evidence under criterion 4 around some of the detail that we're looking at. That's quite a high level question. So if there's more specific points, you're happy to receive that and or provide, as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, a more detailed response that we can provide and share with everybody if required.
We have a question here around timelines for establishing a corridor code. So that's something that the state is very active in pursuing. But what's important to note is that the sorts of functions that we've outlined for corridor code are functions that the state already has within its powers. and so the state will be facilitating this in the near term. One example of that is the tenure scenario that Catherine spoke to before, and the approach we're taking there, supported by Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, and even further within that, the opportunity that in order to move in a timely manner, that the initial form of tenure may evolve over time to a more enduring form of tenure. And so this is part of the approach that we're taking here in order to ensure that we can move ahead and that we're not delaying processes and supporting very active decarbonisation. Chris, one here for you. Are transmission operators expected to bid with offtake agreements before or after EOI?
So yeah, I think in here we would refer to criteria 1 and section 5.2. So ultimately, offtake agreements are matters for the proponent to make with their customers. The state's only involvement there is to ensure that they're consistent with the regulatory regime that exists, which, as noted before, is a relatively light touch regime. Noting that the Pilbara is full of, most of the customers are fairly sophisticated and large and are able to negotiate themselves with proponents. So ultimately, the commercial operations there are matters for the proponent to decide for themselves.
And perhaps just further to that, part of what we recognise here is that as an EOI process, there is further development that needs to occur in terms of the commerciality of projects that may come forward that is understood and recognised. I guess in terms of evidence of offtake agreements, certainly as you move towards final investment decisions, financial close with funders or financiers, including the CEFC, there will certainly be information that they will require, and we will look to mirror some of those requirements in terms of the agreement pathway that we move forward through, which Catherine spoke to in the Corridor Development Agreement and also the Corridor Tenure Agreement.
And just to add very slightly, we did detail some of that information, as Chris mentioned, in criteria 1 in the blue example of documentary evidence box, which is on page 12, just to bring to your attention.
No, sorry, Chris, a question around the priority projects.
Yeah, sure. So the question was, there are 6 priority projects identified. Is the order they're listed in the order of priority, or will the state progress those 6 at once? So in the first instance, we've identified 4 priority projects. Ultimately, we're looking for projects to proceed as soon as they're ready. So the state doesn't really have any priority order for them. We're looking for the projects to proceed as quickly as they can, while meeting all of the expectations in terms of engagement with community and the like. So ultimately, no special priority that we're adding to those projects. Thanks.
Go with the next one as well, if you like.
Yep. So we've got how will the corridor routes be determined? Driven by the TIV or the Corridor Co or collaboration. Ultimately, this will be what we've done to date is looking at sort of node to node, transmission corridors. When it comes to the actual route that the corridor takes, this will be a collaboration between the corridor entity, the project proponent, and the relevant stakeholders, which are impacted by the transmission line. So ultimately, the exact mix of that will be determined on a project by project basis. Some projects are already, as Tim has mentioned before, people might present and pitch a project that's already had some work undertaken. Some might be pitching a project which has less work undertaken. So there'll be different mixes in terms of the in terms of who does what. But ultimately, it'll be a collaborative response from the stakeholders, the Corridor Co and the project proponent.
Thanks, Chris. I think we can pick up the next one too.
And are you expecting 3,000 kilometres to delivered in this stage of the project, or are the goals towards 2050? So the 3,000 kilometres is a reference to the ultimate common use vision that was outlined in those slides at the beginning, where all of the orange lines that were underneath there, they are concepts at the moment. In terms of the first stage, we wouldn't be looking at 3,000 kilometres. We'd be looking at or probably less than 1,000. I would have to come out there and add up the distances between the corridors. So take that one on notice. But yeah, we'll be looking for less in stage one. But still, that's a very substantial investment, particularly with high voltage transmission in the Pilbara. This would be a transformative set of projects. So, you know, while less than 3,000, it would still be very, very significant for the region and the state.
Thank you. It was stated that existing easements would need to be transferred to Corridor Co. Will the state be paying compensation for that? What happens if that entity that owns the easement is not the winner of the process? Catherine, I'll put that one to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Tim. We don't intend, we intend that people be compensated for investments that they've made to date, but the details and arrangements around that will be negotiated at the time, including through the corridor development agreement. I note the comment around if you're not the winner, but those sort of discussions will be post the EOI process.
Thanks, Catherine. Will all towns such as Tom Price, Parabadoo, Marble Bar benefiting from the supply of power from the works? We have an arrangement where all those towns are currently supplied by Horizon Power in terms of residential or small use customers, including small use businesses, and that will continue to be the case. We can obviously see a future where as the network grows and there are more points of interconnection, that there are increasing benefits that are provided across the entire spectrum, and the opportunity to integrate more and more renewable into the system. It is true that the focus of the transmission is about decarbonising industry and providing opportunities for the development of future green industries in the Pilbara, and also recognising that many towns across the Pilbara area and other parts of Western Australia are remote to network and will continue to be remote to network, that standalone power solutions, including increasingly ones based on local renewables, will need to be part of the increasing mix, and there are government initiatives in and around those elements. So it's a bit of a combination of both there. Thanks, Damien.
The EOI process is anticipated in the future. I think we did address this previously, that we're focusing on the 4 priority transmission corridors at the moment, but there is the potential for future processes as the Pilbara Grid continues to evolve and expand. We've specifically referenced that in the EOI document. That is a possibility potential for the future.
And further to Catherine's remarks, we would potentially see it as a sign of success if there is, more emerging demand, more emerging priorities, that are looking to seek decarbonisation outcomes in the Pilbara. And so part of the reason why we are very interested in continuing to do the whole system modelling work is to make sure that we do have a handle on that, continue to engage across all actors in the Pilbara to understand what initiatives are out there and being developed, whether it be in the form of renewable generation, new clean industries that want to connect to the network or the growing network to secure large-scale renewables as part of their business model. We're very interested in seeing that. You need to start somewhere. These are significant priorities that have had wide-scale support across the Pilbara groups that we've engaged with over a significant amount of time. So we feel these are certainly no regrets in terms of priorities and form the initial strong backbone of a system that can grow and support more priorities to come into place. Okay, at this stage, it looks like we're not getting any more questions, but as I did this last time, we did get another flurry. So who knows, we might yet get a few more. Encourage you to submit any more questions if you have them. But we are closing in on time, so if we don't get any more questions through in the next minute or so, we will look to close. As I do that and give a moment for more questions to come through, I'd very much like to thank you all for your interest, for your participation in this process, and I guess, work with us as we move through. As we mentioned, there is some very good material online if you haven't already accessed it, and there is an opportunity for you to continue to engage with us over the coming period of time before the application process comes to an end, and we encourage you to do that. Okay, so we did have one more question come through. Excellent. Will ISOCO play a part in this process? So the Pilbara ISOCO, or the Pilbara Independent System Operator Company, as it's known in full, has played a very active part in this process from the very, very beginning. And they've continued to play an active part in this process and will continue to play an active part in this process. As Catherine outlined, there is an evolving role for the Pilbara ISOCO as it grows with the growing market and the growing industry as it becomes more complex and connects more renewables and more off-takers seeking to utilise those renewables in an interconnected and common use system. So absolutely, the Pilbara ISOCO is critical in terms of the operation of this and satisfying key objectives in terms of making sure that the system is one that we can all rely upon for a good, secure supply of electricity in order to support the types of industries that we have and will get into the future. So with that, hang on, we did get one more. I knew if I talked long enough, we'd get another question through. I'm really looking to exhaust you here in terms of all your questions. This is a good question, relates to what level of benefit sharing detail do you expect in EOI, referring explicitly to criteria 2. So yeah, good question. So I think most people would understand that traditional owner groups, not just in the Pilbara, but absolutely in the Pilbara, have becoming increasingly engaged in the clean energy transition. I have heard directly from traditional owners across the Pilbara that they see this as a real opportunity to participate within the clean energy transition, and participation and partnership are key words that are often used, and they're looking to move beyond business as usual in terms of normal native title determinations, in terms of access to country and approvals that fall off that, and be able to work with proponents to support good outcomes, to support projects and the footprint of those projects be in the right places and satisfy objectives that we talked about in terms of minimising impact on country and heritage, but also providing meaningful ways in which traditional owners can share in the economic benefits of this clean energy transition. And so that should absolutely be part of your focus in terms of how you seek to address that criteria. Okay, all right. We have no more questions that have come through. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for participating. I'd like to thank you for your excellent questions and look forward to working with you as we move through the rest of this process. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again. Goodbye.